but welcome everybody. It's so lovely to have you on the call with us this afternoon. And thank you for joining us for such an exciting topic. Before we begin, as per usual, we'd just like to run you through some house rules. Even though we're well acquainted with Zoom, I sometimes forget about these too. I tend to either not mute when I should and stay muted when I need to speak. But with that said, please mute your microphone when you are not speaking. Feel free to use the chat function for questions. We have a few individuals on the call that will keep their eyes out for any comments or responses that you have. And so we'll keep on monitoring the chats, but we will have some time for questions and answers at the end of the session if you'd like to ask your question then as well. Perhaps we have questions that we need answering too. But just before we begin, I'd like to introduce myself and Yellow Seed to you. So my name is Tegan Rutledge and I am a consultant at Yellow Seed, and I assist with a lot of the projects in the talent management space. So today's topic is really, really exciting for me. Yellow Seed Consulting, as it looks today, is a multi-divisional company with some critical focus areas. Our history, however, is firmly rooted in talent management and our love for development of people. So today's theme is really fitting. The focus of our business today is to provide you with solutions that offer a full talent ecosystem. Our diverse team of creative and learning-obsessed individuals are dedicated to effecting meaningful change within the world of work through the power of modern assessments, agile talent management, team optimization, and contemporary learning and development. If you would like any more information about Yellow Seed, please do feel free to visit our website at www.yellowseed.co.za. Okay, so as we jump into the session, I do just want to preface it. I know you all know why you're here, but it's important just to give a bit of an introduction to the topic today. And so with that said, the skills required of employees are really changing swiftly at the moment, and research suggests that the continuation of immanent technology could displace 3.3 million existing jobs in South Africa by 2030, which is really scary. But it can also engender 4.5 million potential new jobs, which is really exciting. And expectedly, this implicates significant workforce transitions in South Africa. And the already existing challenge organizations face in identifying future fit skills and securing critically skilled talent has really been exacerbated by COVID-19, as well as a lack of future capabilities research within the African context. So this panel session intends to explore the future capabilities that are most critical and in the shortest supply within the African context, and identify the next steps for organizations to better respond to the needs of the business, particularly regarding the scalable development of future capabilities. So our panel today will draw on the research concluded by the Workwell unit at the Northwest University on creating a future capabilities index. Insights will be informed by the knowledge, findings, and scenarios experienced by each panelist to allow listeners the opportunity to learn from real-life experiences, practical solutions, and research efforts that have been applied. So with that said, I'd really like to get into our panel today and introduce them to you before LeMay takes you through some of the research that has been found so far. So with that said, I'll introduce Prof. LeMay Kukumur first. LeMay is an industrial psychologist with extensive experience in the industry. She has authored and co-authored many publications relating to the field of talent management, leadership development, innovation, transformations, and future skills. So we know that we're in very capable hands with her on the call today. She is also the head of people development at Yellow Seed Consulting and an associate professor of practice at the Northwest University. So welcome, LeMay. We then also have Philip Chikotshi on our call today, and Phil's current role is Vice President and he for human resources and his role is to champion the people and culture strategy for all of the StarTech sites in South Africa, whilst also serving as one of the executive committee members for the organization. Phil's really passionate about talent development and invests most of his time in mentoring young leaders, as well as driving the succession planning strategy. So welcome to you, Phil. We also have Dr. Boa Jonker on the call. He is a senior lecturer at the Northwest University. He's the section editor of the African Journal of Employee Relations. Boer is a senior lecturer in the Industrial Psychology and Strategic Human Resource Management and Department at the Northwest University. He's also involved in research that claims to address current challenges in the new world of work. Boer published a number of academic articles in national and international peer-reviewed journals. In addition, he also co-authored chapters in the book Developing Soft Skills for Success, a guide for modern professionals. So as you can tell already, we have a wealth of experience on the call with us. And then last but not least, we have Reino Zili joining us. He is the Head of Learning and Development at Yellow Seed, and he's certified in learning and development. He's a certified learning and development professional with global skill development. Reino is passionate about psychology, neuroscience, learning and content development. And with years of experience in learning, content development and strategy, he's also an inventive individual who really brings creativity and experience to any project. And anyone who's worked with Reino can really agree with those. Great, so I'll hand over to you, Lemay, just to preface the topic a little bit more, and then we'll jump into the panel questions.
Thanks, Tegan, and welcome to my panel members. I'm really excited about today's topic. Let me just share my screen. Okay. So I'm going to try and go through some of the information as quickly as I can, because I really want to get to some of the inputs with my fellow colleagues. I think there's some really interesting questions and practical aspects that we want to get into, but maybe just to position for those of you that haven't been exposed to some of the research that we've been doing. Back in 2021, as part of the WorkWell research unit objectives, we were just discussing some of the problems that we're experiencing with our clients, some of the research points that Tegan mentioned in terms of the job displacement and the emerging transitions that would need to happen with jobs falling away and so many new jobs being created. And as we went through just discussing some of these opportunities, we realized that there is very little research in the South African sphere. And so that's really where the dream was born. And as we embarked on this research project, we really thoroughly explored the existing research. And we quickly realized that almost all of the research done to date was focused on the US or European markets, some focusing on Asia, but very, very little research focused on the African context. And so we realized the need for an African-based research project to really support organizations as we navigate this dilemma, this future capability dilemma of a lot of skills falling away and a lot of new skills coming in, and that needing to happen, that reskilling needing to happen at quite an accelerated pace. We also realized how the opportunity to have reliable data. So it's not just, oh, we think or we feel that it should be this capability or that capability, or let's just use whatever is being listed in the US or European market, but let's really have reliable data to identify those key capabilities and then develop them based on strategic initiatives. And so what were our research objectives? Number one, we wanted to develop a future capability index for the African context. We wanted to, secondly, in the future capability index, we wanted to identify what was most critical and what was shortest in supply. So most critical, really talking about the importance to the business, but then also scarcity, so that we could identify where should we focus first, what is highest in priority. Third research objective was to develop some form of a maturity index that could help organizations gauge where are we in our future capability development journey. Are we really starting out grassroots and we need to put some of those baby steps in place, or we're further down the journey, but we need to go to this next maturity curve? And so we wanted to create a maturity index that could map out where each organization is on that particular journey. And so that could form some form of a benchmark across different industries, across different regions even, to identify what are our strategic gaps, what are the next steps that we need to do as an organization to ensure that we address the future capability conundrum. the exciting part for us as we embarked on this research journey was to really take hands with industry experts, with individuals who are in practice, who are struggling with these particular struggles. And so as a team between Yellow Seed, Northwest University, and 6 or 7 participating organizations, which I'll highlight in a moment, we really understood the importance of going about this research. So what was our approach? We understood that this is quite a big elephant. And so we started off with a pilot study, and we chose the financial services sector back in 2021, focused on that quite strongly in 2022, merely because of the maturity levels of that particular sector being quite high. And so we started off with focus groups. We didn't want to come in with imposing ideas. We had looked at what studies had been done globally, and so we had a good idea of what we thought would come out from a future capability, but we wanted to start with a qualitative view to really understand what are the specific challenges that each organization is going through, and what are some of those future capabilities without imposing that we think this is what it would be. Secondly, as part of the focus groups, we really had the principle that we wanted to have quite a broad input. So we wanted to focus on the entire HR community. So we went to HR executives, to learning and development, OD. We went to the talent acquisition team. We specifically went to the business partners to understand what are some of those key challenges coming out within the different business units. And so we had really robust conversations with all of the HR teams to understand what are some of those key challenges, what are those capabilities, and what do they look like? What, even if we list them as data analytics or emotional intelligence, what does that look like within their particular context? So next step was that we drafted a future capability index, and we started to define what this maturity index could look like. And we then went to the leaders within these different organizations, the business leaders. We asked them to clarify the criticality and the scarcity, and to also prioritize if there were other future capabilities that the HR team had missed. And so we are, in terms of the financial services sector, we are just about to publish and start to share some of these results. But what did we find? So in terms of the challenges, we understood that most organizations struggle to identify and articulate these required capabilities. We also found that securing these capabilities fast enough to adjust to the business needs is really what many organizations are struggling with. And then lastly, the rate at which these skills need to be accelerated. So a lot of these capabilities need to be developed across the entire organization. And so there's a real challenge in terms of scalability and volume, and how do we move the dial across the entire organization. The other thing that we found as we were actually starting off the project is that we started off looking at skills, future skills. And as we embarked on the process, we realized that skills really talk about what a person can do, but it's very specific to a particular function, a tool, an outcome, a specific technology. And so we quickly realized that this focusing on the skills level is almost too granular and too specific to the specific context in the specific organization. So from there, we went to competencies, most of us being psychologists and scientists at nature. And we thought maybe competencies is what we need to look at, which we understand as demonstrated ability or performance. So really tapping into that it needs to exist, it needs to be able, you need to be able to demonstrate it. But what we also quickly realize is that competencies doesn't really take account the evolution of what we were trying to look at, the changing nature of some of the skills that we wanted to assess. And so we ended up with capabilities, a relatively new term that is starting to be used a lot more. But what we understood around capabilities is that it talks to the attributes that have the capacity of being realized independent of the context. So it really talks to the potential ability as well as the opportunity to actually display these capabilities. And sometimes employees might have the competence or the skills laying latently, but the organization needs to offer the opportunity so that the capabilities can be developed. So what were the results? We identified 35 future capabilities. We categorized them in 6 categories. We identified criticality and urgency of each of them. We also identified the behavioral descriptors, the skills, the knowledge required, as well as the underlying business need. Now, I'm going to show them to you in a moment, but as a starting point, we realized that maybe the actual 35 capabilities are perhaps not that unique or that different from what we're seeing in different regions and the research that has been done there. But what was really interesting is that we are seeing quite a difference in the criticality, the urgency, the business need that is very specific to the African context, and the way that these capabilities are to be developed. So here are the 35 future capabilities and the categories. So 5 business-related capabilities, 6 around data science and technology, another 6 that's focused on leadership, the next one on interpersonal capabilities, intrapersonal capabilities, and lastly, clustered around cognitive capabilities. And we'll make this available afterwards for anyone that is interested, because I'm not able to go through all 35. But what I maybe want to highlight is that there were some of these that were quite new and evolving. So novel capabilities like design thinking, digital marketing, looking at AI, machine learning, even cultural intelligence, which perhaps what has been there for the last couple of years, but definitely strong focus in the last 2 to 3 years. And then also interesting capabilities like cognitive load management, which is a completely new one, which we haven't really seen in some of the other research. But then it's also important to realize that some of these have been along for quite some time. And so when we talk about future capabilities, we sometimes fall in the trap that we think it's new. But what it does do, it emphasizes the importance of these capabilities in the future, and the importance of making sure that all organizations are actually investing in some of these. So if you look at, for example, business acumen, customer focused, coaching and mentoring, strategic planning, etc., a lot of the interpersonal and intrapersonal are your typical emotional intelligence capabilities, which is not new, right? It's very specific to human capability, which is also a trend that we saw both in the existing research as well as our research, but it's not new, it's not novel. So the other interesting thing, perhaps just to highlight that as well, that across the board, there was one capability that stood up above all the others, and that was learning agility. And we realized that learning agility is probably one of the foundational capabilities that enables many of the others. And so this was something that really excited the research team, realizing that learning agility is the key to many of the other capabilities, because it allows the employee to learn quicker, to acquire some of the other capabilities a lot quicker. And so this is one that we as a team are investigating a lot more and trying to understand, how do we get better at developing learning agility at scale within organizations. So that's it, Tegan. That is what I wanted to share. I hope that gives some context. There's a lot more that we can share as we go into the detail, but I think as we tap into some of these questions to the panel, we'll be able to unpack a bit more of them.
Great, thanks so much, Lemay. I think, yeah, added so much context to today's discussion. So really excited to get into the panel questions now. So I'm just going to kick off, and my first question is to Phil and Rainer. And my question is, how can skills development efforts be redesigned to focus on accelerating future capabilities at scale?
Sure, Tegan, I'm actually happy to take that question.
Great,
and it's
thanks.
an important follow-up question after such an insightful presentation, because you see, the starting point has to be in assessing the current needs versus the future needs. We can never talk about future capabilities and not link them with the future of work. It's one thing to start developing and redesigning some capabilities today, but how relevant are they for the future of work tomorrow, especially if we're tying it with the report that just got presented now. I actually stumbled across a report that was presented by Capitec just the past week, and it's called the Data Literacy Report. I found it quite interesting because it picks up things related to the data roadblock. And one of the most interesting things that it picks up is that 89% of the organizations in South Africa today do not have a data culture. In other words, they also do not invest in any analytical capabilities for future. And what that means is that if I had listened to and seen the Lomis representation correctly, by 2030, we could lose up to 3 million jobs, if not more. And you will see that part of that is linked to organizations not being able to respond to the future of work. I'll give a practical example of what happened to us, and it probably happened to many of us during COVID. In 2021, at the heart of COVID, we had an opportunity to hire 1,000 employees. And the caveat there was that all these employees had to be working from home. And we had never deployed a work from home solution before. And we had only 30 days to do so. Fortunately for us, we were successful in doing that because we had already built in internal capabilities from the IT infrastructure, and we were also able to do the visual trainings for that staff as soon as they had joined. So it's very important for us as organizations to pretty much forecast what the skills for the future look like and then further prepare for same. And I don't know if that helps answer that question. And Bola, you can definitely chip in there as well.
Definitely. Reino, did you want to add?
Yeah, so a couple of points from my side. Thanks, Paul. That very much. I think the starting point is identifying these capabilities and what it means for your organization, right? Finance is going to be different to retail. These capabilities might vary from an industry. So I think that's why we feel passionate about the study that we've been busy with, because that's the starting point, right? And once we've got that foundation, we need to be designing the learning. We're talking about how do we redesign and how do we accelerate, right? And so the learning experiences need to be designed according to those capabilities. And from my perspective, what I've seen and what we know of learning is that there needs to be a shift into active learning. So, giving employees and people hands-on experiences to actually apply this knowledge, put it into action. We know this is how we learn the best, right? So if we want to accelerate learning, then let's tap into the way the neuroscience functions in our minds, right? And in addition to that, I think some important things as well as the culture of learning is such an important point to start mentioning and talking about. And this basically involves like creating a culture where learning is valued, it's encouraged, it's rewarded. Leaders are setting examples of what they want their employees to be mirroring, right? So if the leaders come with a learning mindset, if leaders are driving the learning agenda and really empowering every level of the organization to prioritize learning, then I think we'll start accelerating this a lot more. And with acceleration, we're also talking about leveraging technology. I think we're living in an era where the world of online learning and different technology mediums really need to be harnessed more and more. And to Phil's point, data, measuring the impact and understanding what's working, what's not working, and focusing in on those specific interventions that are really moving the needle the most. What's not measured is not improved. So I think with technology, we get this data, we get the intelligence, we mix that up with the culture of learning where it's all valued and it's focusing on active learning. And I think that's really where the acceleration piece comes in from my perspective.
Great. Thank you so much, Raina and Phil. So insightful, and I think what an advantage we're at to be able to have this type of data on our hands. as that starting point and as that building block. Rainer, you made some great points now regarding learning and learning agility and culture, but I'd really like to hear more about how we could practically go about enhancing learning agility within an organization to equip employees with the skill to learn quickly and unlearn and reskill, etc. So any practical tips around that other than the culture, obviously?
Yeah, I think learning agility has so much to do with the mindset and how people see their own limiting beliefs, how they view their own capacity to learn. So when we're talking about culture, we also need to talk about how are you communicating and how are you empowering your teams and your employees with that mindset. You know, this culture of continuous learning, lifelong learning, and really encouraging employees to take ownership of their own learning and development, right? So providing them with the mindset, but also the opportunities and rewarding those efforts of improving their own skills. So that's the mindset part. And I think that's a really important fundamental for any learning agility development, right? But once that's in place, I think the environment, the ecosystem that you're creating, the buckets that you're creating for that to really take fruit becomes an important conversation. You know, are you offering an ecosystem where this self-driven, intrinsic motivation to learn has a place? You know, is there an environment where they can go and find some personalized learning, things that they want to excel in? What we know about learning and what we're learning more about it is that micro learning and short little stints, learning in the flow of work, has become the way of learning for the future. So I think that ecosystem of, are you with the mindsets giving employees that place where they can go and find what they want to learn? And another important one with learning agility is how we view failure. And are we allowing people, are we encouraging experimentation and risk-taking and safe failure, right? And I think how we frame failure in the organization is such a big part with the learning agility efforts of an organization. So rethinking how we talk about failure is such an important thing. Are we punishing it? Are we slapping on the wrist? Or are we creating this environment where innovation is more important, right? We're prioritizing innovation over fear of failure. And I think that's really some of the fundamental seeds that we've seen of learning agility. Obviously, peer coaching and feedback and all of these kind of things form part of this ecosystem. And so there's many ways that this ecosystem can look, but I think emphasizing that mindset, giving them the environment, giving them the opportunities, and focusing on soft skills. If we look at the critical skills that Lumay highlighted, a lot of the critical thinking, communication, collaboration, that's what makes more agile learners, social learners, and sort of providing emphasis on that as well is fundamental.
Great. Thanks so much, Rainer. Such incredible practical tips. I really love those. Thank you. And I love how you spoke of allowing employees to actually take their own ownership over that learning journey and building that learning agility, which also leads me into my next question. And I'm really interested, and this one is for you, Boe, into understanding, obviously we've got the, taking that self-ownership as well, but how can organizations, CETAs, training institutions, and academic institutions partner to collectively reskill and upskill employees to grow future capabilities? Because I think it's in all of our best interests, not only you as an independent organization. So I'd love to hear more about what type of partnering opportunities you think there are.
Thanks, Tegan. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's really, I think the operative word there is partnering. It really takes a huge village, to try and raise this child. We can't deny that organizations are actually at the forefront of all these disruptive changes that takes place. So in my view, organizations really takes a critical role, plays a critical role when it comes to staying in the question of what are the future capabilities that we will need, really focusing on this, deeply, letting it simmer and resonate with them a while before they tackle things like their skills plans, audits, workplace skills audits, their regulatory reporting to the CETAs and so on, because it really starts there for me, so that they can get the correct information, the right information to the CETAs, about future capabilities. Because that information will then ultimately inform the training institutions, also the higher education institutions, on what capabilities will be needed. Really, really, move a dial for us in South Africa and Africa. Then coming back to organizations again, in my view, organizations should really relook their career development support structures and strategies. It ultimately comes down to talent acquisition and talent management, talent retention. We know we are in a talent war, globally, and even though it has been going on for a while, the talent pool is still very, very small. And now we're talking about future capabilities. In my view, the talent war, is just raging on, and that pool is probably getting smaller unless we do something about it. At the heart of the talent question, and strongly linked to that is your business strategy. So are organizations really elevating talent management to its highest level, policy-wise, implementation-wise, support-wise? Because for me, that would be key. Moving on to CETAs, basically, we should allow CETAs to align with the fourth industrial revolution and a new world of work, and the whole aspect of the agile learning environment. It might be that our workings with CETAs should really be streamlined. Quicker reaction times, quicker release of funds, quicker analysis of sector-wide anomalies or needs that come up, so that in training institutions can be incentivized to develop new programs, and move the dial forward. Then when we look at academic institutions, for example, where I am, the Northwest University is actively working on a PQ program quality mix a strategy at the moment. And at the heart of it, it's really about looking at redundancies in our learning programs, looking at duplication, where are we focusing too much on and tiring out the students, overloading them, but where are the gaps as well? And that fits nicely into the whole, the bigger, larger recurriculation process that's taking place to really identify, what we need students to learn going forward. And so for doing that, I think practically we need the inputs of advisory panels, representative of industry, of CETAs, of other higher education institutions, all the role players that should and would play a critical role in making sure that those capabilities are incorporated in our learning structures and programs.
Thanks, Bo. And may I see your hand is up?
Thanks, Tegan. Yeah, I want to maybe just add to what Bo was saying, and that's what's so exciting for me in terms of the research that we've concluded, where we actively took hands between a university, a consulting organization, and a range of corporate organizations who are actually competitors. And when all of these minds came together to really discuss the challenge at hand, so part of, and I didn't mention that perhaps in the introduction, but we did create an advisory council with representation from each participating organization, as well as the university and Yellow Seed. And we deliberately did not go to CETA just yet because of the relationship with the higher education institution. But that is part of our phase 2. Our step 2 is to start inviting inputs from the CETA industry as well, and representation there. And it was so promising to see how all of the organizations were willing to really actively take part, bring in ideas, even share academies and skills development opportunities across the different businesses. So the partnership is key. If every organization is only going to focus on their own little environment and not take hands with the educational institutions who are bringing in the youth who need to be developing these future capabilities, it won't succeed. If the educational institutions are not constantly engaging with practice and understanding what do these skills look like, how are they changing, how do we need to adapt the content and the learning that we're providing to our young adults, it's also not going to be successful. So it cannot be done in isolation. That partnership is absolutely critical. And what we're seeing is the appetite and the maturity is there for many participating organizations. We've also been engaging with companies like Yes for Youth and Cigna, who are actively involved in providing work opportunities for our youth. And there are partnership opportunities. So really is in the partnerships, I think, that the magic can happen.
Thanks, Lemay. Thanks, Boa. So profound. It was, yeah, what was really profound for me, Boa, is you mentioning that we already aren't starting at a great base level in terms of skill. We already have this talent shortage. And so now to try and say, well, we need all of these new capabilities is, yeah, it's scary. And so, like you said, Lemay, that partnership is so necessary. And so my next question is to the whole panel. And what I'd really like to hear about is, what are some of the practical actions that L&D teams can start to take to address these redundant skills? Where do we start? Obviously, identification was mentioned, but what can L&D teams do to start to address these redundant skills and future fit skill shortages? I'd really love to hear some practical examples of some of the innovative initiatives that have been going on that you've already seen or that perhaps you foresee coming in 2023. Not sure who would like to go first, but the floor is yours.
I'll maybe take a stab at it. I know, Phil, you've also got some amazing ideas that we've shared. Maybe just a few that we're doing at Yellow Seed with some of our clients. And I'm going to try and make it as practical as possible. We fundamentally believe that people learn when they teach. And so that's something really practical that we find. If we're expecting our learners to actually teach and apply, the learning just shoots up quite significantly. And so when you're implementing learning interventions, there has to be a responsibility. What are you going to do with the knowledge? It's not just, I'm going to sit in the session and I'm going to tick my compliance box that I did the learning and it's done. Because that's not really going to move the dial. I have to have a responsibility. I need to teach it when I come back into the working environment, or I have to apply it, or there's an assignment, an action learning assignment linked to it. So that's quite key. We've also learned that using multiple learning channels is very, very effective. So it's not enough to just sit in a classroom and hear it. There's, if you combine it with, there's an online digital learning component that we can really scale quite quickly. Then there's a facilitated with an expert where there's perhaps conversations between colleagues and you bring in that social component. There could be peer coaching, Reino mentioned that. There could be action learning assignments. There could be, and we've also done some really fun things where we design board games and simulations to really get the active problem solving, active learning there. We've done hackathons, we've done simulations, we've done reverse mentoring, where we're actually asking some of the youngsters to mentor some of the older and more seasoned employees and see what can we learn from each other. So really thinking about, it's not just one intervention, it's in and it's out. We need to think about this as a learning journey, the ecosystem that we're creating so that it's constantly applying that learning. And then maybe just another quite innovative initiative that we are starting to introduce or have introduced with some of our clients in terms of technology, partnering with technology that personalizes learning. So whether it's a really good LMS, whether it is an employee experience technology. So we've worked with a platform called Fuel 50 that really harnesses a key data from employees in terms of their own skills, their own aspirations, and creating really personalized learning journeys. We've partnered with a technology called Cloverleaf that personalizes coaching and scales it to all organizations because it's AI-based, so it collects lots of information about the individual and then personalizes those tips that is sent either daily or weekly. You define that, but so really partnering with technology that helps us to scale and accelerate the learning, because if we only rely on the traditional methods of doing learning and development, it's just not sufficient. It's not quick enough. It doesn't allow for the scalability. So we really have to think about innovative, out of the box, partnering with technology, action learning, as Raina was saying. So yeah, maybe just a few ideas to kick us off.
And so listening to you, made me think that, you know, when one is on this journey, you really, you know, it's really active. It's ongoing, it's constant, and you're actually creating meaning, you know, for your job role, for your contribution, for the value that you add to the organization, and by incorporating these new learnings, these new skills and attributes and things, basically you start to realize that some of the older skills that you had becomes redundant, and you can really safely step away from that. You don't need that anymore, because with a constant culture of implementing and applying, new learning has taken place. No, just a thought that I had.
Thanks for sharing. I'm briefly pausing to see if any of the other, Raina, I see you're unmuted.
Yeah, Lemay mentioned a lot of, you know, the type of things that how we approach it, but maybe just to firstly bring it back to the learning agility, right? We're talking about redundant skills, relearning, unlearning, which is quite a hard thing to do, right? And I think there's this concept of growth mindset, Carol Dweck's work, which transcends a lot of this conversation. And I think if organizations are really trying to shift the, you know, the legacy skills into the future skills, there's this critical piece of, and I might be repeating myself again now here, the mindset, right? What is the initiatives that you're trying to implement to shift the mindset from fixed to growth? I think it's fundamental to any unlearning or reskilling initiatives, because if you've got a team and, you know, they stuck in their ways, they're used to doing things a certain way, you're going to get resistance unless you get the soil fertile, unless you shake things up a bit and you move them out of their comfort zone and into the growth zone, by just really calling out some of those fixed mindsets in a way, you know. And yeah, that's just something that I wanted to add to Lemay. And maybe just the last point on what I wanted to add to Lemay's examples. We've seen that e-learning by itself is not the answer. Okay, so when you're talking practical here, we've seen from our experience that this blended experience is really where it's at. You know, the pure classroom facilitated style seems to have been replaced a bit. People's schedules are too busy for that, right? Whereas the pure e-learning lacks a lot of engagement and a lot of interaction. So we've seen great success with this blended program where you flip the classroom. And so your e-learning is your pre-workshop learning, where you get everyone on this base level understanding of the knowledge. And then you come into a classroom, and this is where the flipped classroom comes in. It comes from, if you think of when you were in school, You are given the theory in the classroom with the teacher, all your friends, the social engagement there. You're bombarded with a whole bunch of slides and information. You have to take notes. And then you go home and you do the application by yourself alone, where you don't have the support or the social environment. And what we've seen from studies is this is actually a bit backwards. And this is where the flipped methodology has really become a powerful methodology for us, because now with e-learning, pre-workshop learning, everyone's on the same level. They come into the classroom now and it becomes hands-on, it becomes practical, application, elaboration. These are all neuroscience-based principles where now people can ask questions and they can deepen their understanding of the topic, right? So seeing things in their isolated modalities, you know, they don't work in isolation that well. But when you start blending them together, you start getting some really phenomenal results with the learning. Yeah.
Well, would you like to share?
Yeah, I actually just wanted to share an employer perspective when it comes to redundancy of skills, because one of the challenges that we face, and that this is the big question that certainly I get asked sometimes, is to say, you know, whenever there's redundancy of roles, does it mean that we have to always make such roles redundant or make those people retrench those people rather? And the answer to that from an employer perspective is no, because the L&D teams have a role to play where they can be reskilling within an organization, where those employees, instead of retrenching them, they can be reskilled and prepared for different roles within the organization. And this is something that, you know, we are also doing, you know, as part, and we've been doing it as part of preparation for the 4 IR, which is already upon us. I'll give you an example of what we experienced when we started moving into, and this is specifically to my team within the HR team, where previously a lot of HR work very transactional. You know, whether you're going to be doing the leaves, it had to be done manually. Whether you had to do, you know, payroll, it had to be done manually. And we've now got systems that are now addressing all those things. But does that mean that now we have to go ahead and retrench those people? The answer to that is no. We now have to reskill all those resources in order to do to work rather efficiently with the systems that we are introducing within the organization. And I suppose the other point that I wanted to speak about around CETAs and learnerships, because is that, you know, sometimes while the intention of learnerships and CETAs has been well or good, there are times where we as employers, we become the roadblock. We become the reason why there is a redundancy of skills in future. And by that I mean, sometimes when we do these learnerships and CETAs, we do them for tick box exercises. We do them because we will get the points, we will get the grants, we'll get all the funds, but do we really monitor and track what happens to the lifespan of the learner that we have been involved in developing through that journey? I was sharing with Lumei off the record of an example of an HR professional that I hired, an HR graduate, whom I found, and I said, do you have any HR experience? She said she had 0. And I said, well, but it says here that you've been doing a learnership for the last couple of months. And the answer, she said to me, yeah, I've been doing an IT learnership. And I said, but why would you do an IT learnership when you've in fact studied HR? And she said, it's because when I walked into that employer, they said, look, we've got CETAs, we've got this. We don't have an HR job for you, but you can do an IT learnership. Reality of the matter is, at the end of that learnership, she is not able to respond to the future of work because she's not qualified for that. But the employer has ticked the box in terms of learnerships being concluded. So that's why I'm saying, us as employers, we have a role to play to ensure that whatever we are doing, it is meaningful and not necessarily just for our own benefit. And lastly, one of the things that we are doing, and I would encourage the employers to do as well, is, you know, let's extend bursaries. incentives to some of our employees, and they can go and learn outside of our institutions, outside of the internal institutions, so that they can gain more skills in preparation for the roles for the future. And that's the contribution that I just wanted to make on this one, Tegan.
Lovely. Thanks so much, Phil, and thank you to the whole panel. What great insights across the board, and it's lovely to have insights from all of the different industries as well. And so with that said, this one is for you, Lemaine, Phil, specifically as employers as well, and in the different industries. I'd really love to hear about how do we then measure the success of your skill strategy? What are the types of metrics that you need to look at, and how do organizations know then that they really are moving the needles and in your words, Phil, not just ticking those check boxes because they need to?
Do you want to go, Phil, or shall I take a stab at it?
Yeah. I'm happy to go first, Lemaine. Thank you.
Go for it.
So in terms of how we measure, the metrics here, it differs per organization. And I think the focus should be, at the end of the day, what have we achieved? What have we achieved at the end of the day when we have done whatever we have done in terms of that particular strategy? So we should be measuring the actual output. So I'll give you an example. If we're going to measure the skills metric in terms of customer satisfaction, it's going to have to be something that is measurable and achievable. And we should be able to track it. And the recommendation that I always give to organizations is that something like a net promoter score is a very good indicator of whether or not our customers are happy or not. So if I have gone ahead and deployed a skill or trained an employee, I will know that my training has been effective when I see an increase in client satisfaction. Similarly, when it comes to work productivity, I will know that the training that I have effected to those delegates has been effective when I see an increased productivity within my organization. And I think those two are probably the metrics that I would put if I am to measure an effective skill success.
Yeah, love those. And what I particularly like, Phil, is that it's so aligned to the business strategy, right? And what we're trying to drive as a business. It's not separate from that. Tegan, what I maybe want to add, and this is linked to some of the research that we did when we were looking at defining the maturity index, and I think this relates to if we want to define the success, how successful are we in developing the capabilities that the business needs? These are some of the kind of broad categories that we look at and that we found in the research. So number one, we need to understand how closely aligned are we with the business strategy and integrated with the key things that the business is trying to deliver. So I think that talks so wonderfully to Phil's point. If we are looking at customer satisfaction, if we're looking at profit, if we're looking at whatever some of those measures, those strategic measures might be, those are the same measures that we need to be looking at in terms of our success in future capability. Secondly, are we creating a learning culture? And there are ways that we can actually measure that through pulse surveys, through exit interviews, getting feedback from our employees to understand, are we creating a culture that is conducive to learning? Or and what is your experience of your line managers? Sometimes, we have learning culture on the wall, it's on our website from a values point of view, but the actual experience that employees are getting in engaging with their line managers are completely different. We're only focused on work. I don't want to share my resources. I don't want you to get cross-functional experience. Sometimes I'm quite secretive about some of those opportunities. And so can we measure if we're actually moving the needle on a learning culture? Also looking at our success in learning delivery. So let's tap into the learning experiences. And this is where feedback after learning interventions have been implemented to understand how successful were we? What was the experience of the employees? Did they actually learn what they intended to learn? Are there other ways that they actually want to get the content? Is the timing correct? So really getting smarter and better at delivering learning so that it's optimized. We also understand that tapping into the unique needs of the learner. So something that Raino mentioned around learning agility is really, if I am vested in the learning, I will put in a lot more energy into that learning. And so really, are we able to answer the what's in it for me question? Do learners understand what's in it for me, or are they just doing it because the line manager said they should, or they won't get if I think about our mining clients, you know, if I don't complete these compliance trainings, I'm just not able to do my job. So it's literally a tick box versus how will this improve me? How will this improve my career? What's in it for me? And are we able to tap into that? Looking at our ability to automate, to digitize, to even measure. So a lot of the organizations that we work with have very little measures in place. So that's the starting point. Can we measure how quickly we're responding to learning needs? Can we measure the success? Oh, we need tools, we need technology, we need data analytics, which then leads to our metrics and reporting. So maybe just if we talk about how do we know if we're successful, these are some of the things that we tap into to help us identify how mature are we in developing our future capabilities. And these are some of the different maturity levels. We've defined maturity levels within each of these different aspects to help organizations just understand how we're doing, where should we be focusing more effort, what needs to come first, because it doesn't, that's also maybe another sentiment that often we jump to technology and we want to really implement this fantastic, amazing R1 million system that's going to fix all of our problems. But then our strategy isn't aligned. We don't have the culture yet. Our line managers and leaders don't have the right mindset and maturity to create the culture. You know, so it's really understanding what are the fundamentals and building on those blocks to ensure that we are successful.
Thanks so much, Lemay. Thank you for the illustration. And thank you to you too, Phil. Lemay, the first step in your diagram showed that strategy and integration is really a critical part of this. So I'd love to hear from both you and Phil as well. When aligning future capability with business strategy, and this being the critical part, it comes across as that it's something really difficult to do, really difficult practice. So could you give us a few tips on how to achieve strategic alignment when developing for future capabilities?
Sure, and let me maybe mention two, Phil, and then I'd love to maybe, you know, you can add to those. I think for me, two very specific enablers in terms of business alignment and strategy alignment is starting with the decision makers and getting that strategic sponsorship. So your senior leaders are the ones that really understand your business strategy the best and where the business is going. And so we have often partnered with clients in facilitating the conversations with the right people. And before we move to HR or to L&D, we actually need to start the conversation with those individuals that are defining the strategy. So whether it's your executive team, whether it's a strategy team, often companies have an entire department that's defining the business strategy, but that's where the conversation needs to happen. If this is our strategy, how do we translate that into skills and capabilities and even the quantity that we're looking for? And by starting the conversation there, it doesn't just drive intelligence, but it also drives stewardship and sponsorship. So really identifying who are those key leaders that are going to punt and drive the development of future capability as a strategic initiative to enable our business strategy. So it's not just the CHRO or the L&D manager that's driving that. It's actually the entire strategy team or the entire executive team that understand the value of driving capability development. And maybe secondly, I think the power and the value of data analysis. One of the key challenges that came out of the research was how slow the learning and development team is, and not because they are inherently slow, but because of the distance to business and the number of L&D specialists typically in an organization, that ratio, it's typically, you know, like 1 to 100 or 1 to 500. And so harnessing the power of analytics to get closer to business, to articulate what are those capabilities, what is the need right now, how do we accelerate the way that we develop them, but accelerating the relationship and the proximity between the learning and development or talent team and the rest of the business. And if you can use tools, technology, and especially data analytics to drive that and that integration between what the business needs and what we're driving on a learning and development side, I think that is quite critical. And Boa's point earlier around the workplace skills plan is quite critical, right? So our typical way of going about that is that we do that once a year. And now we need to define and try and analyze what will be needed in a year's time. And I think for all of us that's been in business, if I think back to what I thought would be necessary a year ago and where we are today, it's quite different. And so we need to rethink the way that we go about in terms of planning, how short the cycles are, how we can become more iterative, how we can use smarter analytics. From my side.
Great, thanks, Renee. Phil?
Yeah, so I think, Lomé, you've really covered it all. I mean, the only, last point that I can add on this one is, you are not about to align with the business strategy until you understand it. Often, again, from an employer and a business perspective, one of the things that we've discovered is that we find so many runners, everybody's running with a baton, but they don't understand where they are going. So when it starts with understanding what the business strategy is, it then becomes much easier to support. When you understand the needs of the business, it becomes much easier to support. And I always like to give examples. I think Lomé touched on it earlier on when she was speaking about knowing where, what's going to be happening within the business, or where the business will be a year from now. To give you a real example of something that happened within our organization just pre-COVID in 2019, we went through a strategy session, and we understood from there that, in the next year or two, we are going to be scaling up quite rapidly and in huge numbers. And the first question was, where are we going to get the people? Where are we going to get the talent? And because we knew that this is the direction that the business was going to take, we started asking ourselves questions, but it's the questions that we also had to answer ourselves. So, this one, from a hiring perspective, we had to do a massive impact sourcing initiative. We knew that the numbers would be in the region of 1,000. And we decided to do an impact sourcing initiative where we took our offices literally to the communities, to the areas where people never knew of us. We went to the KZN and we found ourselves in Umlazi. We found ourselves in Kwamashu, and we put banners, we are hiring. And community halls were filled up with thousands of young talent that never really heard of us before. And we interviewed them right there in their community halls, and we hired them and we put them on our pipeline. As I speak today, all those young people are working for us because fast forward, that need realized, and we were able to close on the business requirement timeously. And I think that's what alignment into a business strategy should speak to.
And maybe to your point, Phil and Lomé, I just read last night in the HR Brew publication that there was a lot of IT hiring going on globally, especially in America. And I know we're talking about South Africa and Africa, but I think the same applies. If one grabs the essence of the story, a lot of IT people were hired, and after COVID, a lot of redundancy in terms of those roles. Although the skills are excellent and needed, the IT firms are scaling down, of course, due to the recession and things like that. On the other side, the automotive industry was basically outsourcing 90% of their soft skills, software development skills in the past, but only now realizing with EVs and the upsurge of EVs, and the whole disruption that takes place in that industry, that they don't have the skills. They usually outsource the skills. Now, a company like VW is planning on bringing in and doing 60% of their own software development by 2030, which is around the corner. But it just shows you how mobile the right skills, the right abilities, capabilities are, if it was developed, and that it can land in non-traditional environments where you wouldn't have thought about it, not a Google, not a Alphabet, or a IT tech company like that, but in a totally different environment, but there's a place. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Boa. Great insights. It's been so lovely. I think we have time for one more question, which Boa and Rainer, I think you have touched on throughout the session, but perhaps you could provide a little bit more detail. But I'd love to know, with both of you being in more of a learning industry, we can obviously have the best content and facilitators and the best learning technology that there is out there. But if the organization is not cultivating a culture that supports learning, it'll be of no use. And I know, Rainer, you also mentioned the mindset now as well, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about the suggestions that you have for an organization to create this culture. What should we be focusing on to create a culture, in addition to that learning mindset, that learning agility? Or maybe, I don't know if you want to start from your perspective in the education industry.
Well, from an education industry, it might be a little bit different, but let me rather start from organizational, and I can maybe expand from there. But I think if one has a clear communication and engagement plan in place, that will help your learning culture tremendously. And if this plan is shared on a variety of platforms, linking to what Lemay said earlier of using multiple platforms, because it's not a one size fits all, and you won't find that one platform is the need for one person versus another. So that is very important, to send this out regularly, like a bi-monthly or something like that would really help a lot in terms of setting the pace for this learning culture. Also, making sure that there's a constant ongoing commitment of teams, because ultimately teams are the ones that should take responsibility for their own learning. And one can do that with regular team talks. So in an academic environment as well, having that open conversation, fearless conversations, maybe challenging the status quo, and looking for solutions, because it's all about solutioning and not challenging the hierarchies or the positions of people. It's about learning together and growing together. What works well in an academics situation is that young lecturers are supported in a buddy system by more seasoned lecturers and researchers working together, and that we find actually is a quick way of skilling and reskilling and probably upskilling in our context as well. So these are some of the important points that that I think could help a long way, or go a long way, in creating a learning culture. Rainer?
Great, thanks, Boa. Yeah, some good insights there. to just re-emphasize the importance. If you want to change the culture, change the mindset, right? That's fundamental. And what we've seen that in application where it works is when you are communicating to everyone the value of learning and self-directed learning. It's like if you think of digital marketing being an external function, there needs to be an internal function of we are actively promoting self-directed learning and really emphasizing the importance of self-directed learning. And with that, what we've also seen is that L&D teams need to also go one step further. One of the programs we're busy rolling out with a client, we've seen great success where not just sending learners on a course or a workshop or sending them an e-learning piece, but we're actually, as an L&D team, facilitating the transfer of that skills back into the business, right? And we do that by engaging the manager, the supervisor levels, the peer groups around that learner. And if we involve, for instance, the manager, like we did, the line manager of the learner, and we get the line manager as excited about these skills that the person's going to be learning, it creates this ecosystem where when the learner comes back into the work environment, they're supported, they're encouraged to share, and social learning becomes the norm. You know, like Lumay was saying, we fundamentally believe teaching what you have learned is one of the best ways to learn. And so you do two things. You accelerate the learner's own retention, but you are also creating this environment where learning is like encouraged and it becomes the norm. And I think that's ultimately what we were trying to address here, creating an environment where learning and sharing and curiosity becomes the norm, and challenging existing beliefs becomes the norm. So yeah, that's some of the practical things we've seen from my perspective. Yeah.
Well, what we also realized, during COVID was that the team leaders doesn't have the answers necessarily. They also don't know. So it's about, co-learning. It's about, allowing yourself to make a mistake, to learn from that, failing forward, and to spark creativity, innovation, instead of just looking towards leadership to resolve. That if a culture can be created that supports innovation, creativity, recognizes it, rewards it, that's a good place to be.
Maybe just to add one last thought there, I think if you want to create a learning culture, you're not going to do that without really getting the investment of the leadership. If the leadership is role modeling this learner mindset, and they're like actively demonstrating what they want their teams to be pursuing, then that's where the real needle starts shifting. If it's just like a tick box exercise, send these people on this course, and there's no passion from the leaders driving this initiative, then you're going to have a fruitless situation. So L&D teams need to become better at bringing leadership on this journey and really making leadership see, and this is to Lumay's point, aligning learning strategies with business strategies so that there's true buy-in, top down, bottom up as well. Everyone sees the value of it. And I think that's where the power lies.
Yep.
Thanks so much, Raina and Boa. Really interesting, and I definitely think there's a golden thread of partnering and helping one another through this. Like you said, Boa, nobody has the answers. So yeah, a lot of collaboration and partnership was mentioned today, which I think is fantastic. And I think it's great that we could all get on this call together. Okay,
great. So, I was just struck again preparing for this and listening to all my wonderful panelists, that there should really be meaning created in whatever we do in an organization, whether it's our learning or, taking personal responsibility, supporting and taking hands. Meaning should be created for every individual, and then a team, and then an organization. And without that, like a previous speaker said, what's really the goal of this exercise? It becomes a tick box exercise. So, but when meaning is created up to bottom down, from the lowest levels up to the top, and we have grasped that, organizations have grasped that, that is also a very powerful thing. Internally driven.
I love that. Thank you, Boa. Cool. I think you closed us off really well then, Boa. And so if you do have any other questions for any of the panelists, please do feel free to reach out. But then I'd just like to close off today and just say thank you so much, and thank you to the wonderful panel. I think such great insights have been shared, and it was really, really informative even for me. So I hope that you all found value in today's session. We will upload a recording of this session as well if you do need it. And like I said, please feel free to reach out to any of the panelists, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us today and to learn about what we really need for the future.
Again, maybe if I can just also add at the end, we are embarking on phase 2 of our research. So we started off with the financial services industry, and we're moving into 4 or 5 other industries. So we started with a very small bite of the elephant. We're quite confident that we can chew off a bit more. And so we really want to invite any African-based organization that is interested in partaking in the research study to identify what are some of those future capabilities in your organization, and how are you doing in terms of your development. So if you are interested in participating, whether you are live on the call or if you're watching it later and you're still interested, please feel free to reach out to either myself or Boa or info@yellowseed.co.za. And we would love to talk to you to see how we can incorporate your business into the research and get some of those lovely data pieces that we were talking about.
Great. Thanks so much, Lemay. Chantal has popped info@yellowseed in the chat box if you do need it. But other than that, I hope you all have a great afternoon further.